What is the true value of a person? Is it the title etched onto a polished brass nameplate? The string of zeros that follows a dollar sign in their bank account? Or is it something quieter, something invisible, something hidden in the hushed hours when the rest of the world is asleep? We measure success in skyscrapers and stock prices, in acquisitions and assets. But what if the greatest asset of all is a person no one even bothers to see? This is a story about a woman who was invisible, and a man who saw everything. It's a story about the true meaning of worth. Alara Vance moved through the silent, cavernous halls of Thorne Industries like a ghost. Her uniform, a drab gray smock, was a cloak of invisibility. By day, this building hummed with the electric pulse of a billion-dollar empire. Men and women in tailored suits strode these marble floors, their voices sharp, their eyes fixed on the future they were carving out of data and dollars. By night, it belonged to Alara. The air, once thick with ambition and expensive cologne, settled into a calm, sterile silence, broken only by the rhythmic hum of her floor polisher and the soft squeak of her cart's wheels. She was the keeper of secrets she didn't know she knew, the silent witness to the aftermath of power. She wiped away the fingerprints of titans from glass-top tables and emptied the wastebaskets filled with their discarded ideas, their crumpled frustrations, their half-eaten power lunches. For Alara, this job was more than a paycheck. It was a penance and a prayer. Every dollar she earned went into a dwindling fund to pay for the nurses who cared for her father. He was a man hollowed out by a world that had once promised him everything. He had been an architect of dreams, a small business owner with a heart full of integrity and a ledger full of hope. But the financial crisis a decade ago, a storm created in buildings just like this one, had swept it all away. The business collapsed, the debt mounted, and the stress broke his health, leaving him a shadow in a quiet room, his memories of building things replaced by a fog of confusion. So Alara cleaned. She scrubbed away the grime of a world that had broken her family, her hands raw, her back aching, but her spirit stubbornly intact. She carried her father's integrity like a hidden jewel. It was all she had left of him, but she had something else too, a gift, or perhaps a curse, that she rarely acknowledged. Numbers to Alara were not just symbols on a page. They were music. They had a rhythm, a harmony. A perfectly balanced sheet sang a quiet, satisfying melody. But a flawed one, a dishonest one, shrieked with a dissonance that scraped at her soul. She could see the lie in a column of figures the way a composer could hear a single flat note in a symphony. It was an instinct, a deep, cellular understanding of patterns. Tonight, in the opulent boardroom on the 48th floor, the dissonance was deafening. A single sheet of paper had missed the shredder, lying face up in a bin of discarded coffee cups and pastry wrappers. It was a preliminary summary of the Ethelred merger. The name meant nothing to her, but the numbers were screaming. She pulled the paper out, her brows furrowed. The projected revenue growth, the asset valuations, the debt-to-equity ratios, they were all technically correct, but the composition was all wrong. It was like a painter using brilliant, vibrant colors to paint a picture of decay. The harmony was forced, the melody a lie. She could feel it in her bones. A deep, unsettling wrongness. She traced a finger over a column of figures representing real estate assets, a valuation that seemed to swell unnaturally, a bubble of air in the heart of the machine. Felt hollow, a beautiful, perfect lie. She didn't know what it meant, not really. She wasn't an analyst. She was just a cleaner. But she knew the sound of a lie, and this page was a symphony of them. Shaking her head, she crumpled the paper and tossed it back into the bin. It was not her world. It was not her problem. Her problem was the rising cost of medication and the weary look in the nurse's eyes. She pushed her cart out of the boardroom, the ghost of that discordant music following her down the empty, echoing corridor. From his penthouse office 50 floors above, Julian Thorne stared out at the sprawling galaxy of city lights, but he saw none of it. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass was a stark, lonely figure, encased in a cage of steel and success. They called him the Ice King, a moniker earned through a series of ruthless, brilliant business decisions that had doubled the value of the empire his father had built. He wore the title like armor, his expression perpetually controlled, his voice a low, measured baritone that rarely betrayed emotion. But tonight, the armor was heavy, and the cage felt very small. The Ethelred merger was poised to be his magnum opus, the deal that would finally eclipse his father's formidable legacy. It was perfect, too perfect. His COO, Marcus Vance, a man whose ambition was as sharp and tailored as his suits, had presented the deal with a wolfish grin. The numbers were flawless, the synergies undeniable. The board was salivating. Everyone was celebrating a victory that hadn't even been won yet. Everyone but Julian. Like Alara, he felt a deep, instinctual dissonance. He couldn't put his finger on it. Every analyst, every consultant had signed off. The due diligence reports were thick, comprehensive, and glowing. Yet, a cold knot of dread sat in his stomach. It felt like walking into a beautifully constructed house and smelling gas. His father, a man forged in the crucible of corporate rating, would have pushed the deal through without a second thought. "Sentiment is a liability," he used to say, his voice like gravel. "Trust the numbers, son." Only the numbers, but Julian had always suspected the numbers could be taught to lie. He was surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear, their loyalty purchased, their opinions curated for his consumption. He trusted no one, least of all Marcus, whose eagerness felt predatory. "It's a clean deal, Julian," his lawyer and oldest friend, David Chun, had said earlier that day, though his eyes held a flicker of the same doubt. "On paper, it's the deal of the decade. But my gut tells me to walk away. And I can't tell you why." Julian trusted David's gut more than a mountain of data. Now, in the crushing silence of his office, the weight of the decision pressed down on him. One signature would define his career, his legacy. One signature felt like a leap into a beautiful, inviting abyss. He loosened his tie, the silk feeling like a noose. He needed air. He needed a different perspective. He needed something real, something true, in this sterile tower of carefully constructed fictions. Driven by an impulse he didn't understand, he left the penthouse and took the private elevator down. He didn't know where he was going. He just walked, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush carpets. The building was a mausoleum of ambition, each empty office a testament to the day's battles. As he passed the 48th floor boardroom, a sliver of light from under the door caught his eye. Cleaner, most likely, but something made him pause. The silence from within was different. It wasn't the sound of vacuuming or spraying. It was a still, focused silence. He pushed the door open a crack, his movements silent, and what he saw stopped him cold. It was a woman in a gray cleaner's smock. Her back was to him. She wasn't cleaning. She was standing before the massive whiteboard, still covered in the complex diagrams and figures from his earlier meeting with Marcus. Her cart was forgotten in the corner. In her hand, she held a dry erase marker, and she was tracing lines in the air, her head tilted as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then, with a hesitant, almost reverent motion, she reached out and drew a shaky circle around a single, obscure data point, an asset valuation figure from one of Ethelred's offshore subsidiaries. It was a number buried so deep in the appendices that even he had barely glanced at it. Yet, it was the very number that had whispered a warning to him all day, the single flat note in an otherwise perfect symphony. Alara didn't hear him enter. The world had faded away, replaced by the silent, screaming chorus of the numbers on the board. The patterns were so clear to her now, laid out in stark black and red ink. The inflated assets, the deferred liabilities disguised as revenue, the cyclical transactions that moved money in a beautiful, meaningless circle. It was all there. A house of cards built with the ink of liars. She felt a phantom sickness in her stomach, the same feeling she'd had when she'd looked at her father's final, desperate ledgers. It was the smell of collapse, the sound of ruin. "What do you see?" The voice was low, calm, and cut through the silence like a razor. Alara gasped, dropping the marker with a clatter. She spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. A man stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the hallway light. As he stepped into the room, the dim light caught the sharp lines of a face she recognized from the corporate portraits in the lobby. Julian Thorne, the Ice King, CEO of everything. She felt a wave of pure terror. She was going to be fired. Fired for touching the board, for daring to exist in this space as anything other than a functionary. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered, her hands wringing the fabric of her smock. I was just cleaning. I'll get back to it. He ignored her apology. His eyes, a startlingly intense shade of gray, were fixed on the whiteboard, on the shaky circle she had drawn. You circled the PTX Holdings valuation, he said, his voice devoid of accusation, filled instead with a chilling curiosity. Why? Her mind raced. She couldn't possibly explain it. How could she tell the most powerful man in the building that the numbers just felt wrong? That they sang a song of deceit? It's nothing, sir. An accident. Don't lie to me, he said, his voice still quiet, but now laced with an unmistakable thread of command. He took another step closer, his presence filling the vast room. He gestured to the board. Tell me what you see. Panic gave way to a strange, defiant calm. She was going to be fired anyway. What did she have to lose? She looked from his impassive face back to the board, and the words came, not from her mind, but from that deeper place of instinct. It's hollow, she said, her voice barely a whisper. All of it. But that part. She pointed a trembling finger at the circle. That's the heart of the lie. The other numbers, they're just propped up by it. It's like a beautiful archway with a cracked keystone. It looks strong. It looks perfect. But one push, and the whole thing will turn to dust. Julian stared at her, his expression unreadable. She had just used a simple architectural metaphor to describe a multi-billion-dollar financial fraud scheme with more accuracy than his entire team of Ivy League analysts. He had spent his day listening to jargon and projections. This woman, this cleaner, was speaking the truth in a language he could feel. How do you know this? He asked, his voice softer now. Who are you? I'm Alara. I'm the cleaner, she said, as if that explained everything. I see the patterns. The numbers don't add up. The melody is wrong. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between her face and the damning circle on the board. The air crackled with a strange energy. He was looking at her, really looking at her, in a way that no one had in years. He wasn't seeing a gray uniform. He was seeing a person. An answer. He had been searching for one piece of unvarnished truth, and he had found it in the most unlikely person imaginable. An idea, insane and reckless, began to form in his mind. It was a gamble that went against every rule of his world. But his world was built on lies. Maybe it was time to change the rules. I am going to make you an offer, Alara, he said, his voice steady. I want you to look at the full merger documents. All of them. I want you to tell me about every cracked keystone you find. Alara stared at him, bewildered. Sir, I don't understand. I'm not qualified. I just push 'em up. You are more qualified than any person in this building, he countered, his conviction absolute. I will pay you $100,000. For 1 week of your time. You will work for me and only for me. No one can know. You will be my ghost, my secret. You will tell me the truth. $100,000. The number was so vast, so impossible, it didn't even sound real. It was a lifeline. It was her father's care for the next decade. It was freedom from the crushing weight of debt that had been her constant companion. But it was also terrifying. This was his world, not hers. A world of sharks where she was a minnow. Why me? She whispered, the question full of a lifetime of being overlooked. Julian's gray eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something beyond the ice. Vulnerability. Because, he said, with a sincerity that shook her to her core, I think you might be the only person in this entire city who isn't already lying to me. The next morning, Alara entered Thorne Industries not through the service entrance in the basement, but through the main lobby's revolving glass doors. She wore her best coat, a threadbare but clean wool garment that felt woefully inadequate amidst the sea of cashmere and tailored suits. She clutched a worn leather satchel to her chest, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Following Julian's cryptic instructions, she took the elevator to the 52nd floor, a level marked as under renovation on the directory. The doors opened to an empty, dust sheet-covered space, except for one room at the far end of the hall. Inside was a small, Spartan office. A simple desk, a chair, a computer, and a locking door. On the desk were stacks of binders, each several inches thick, labeled Project Ethelred, Due Diligence. Awaiting her on the chair was a laptop, sleek and powerful. It was a world away from the mops and buckets in the basement. It was her secret sanctuary, her gilded cage. "This is it." Julian's voice came from behind her. He had entered as silently as he had the night before. "No one comes up here. The only access is through my private elevator. You will have everything you need. Food will be delivered. You will speak to no one but me and my counsel. David Chun." He placed a burner phone on the desk. "My number is the only one programmed in. Call it for anything." Elara looked at the mountain of paper, the scale of the task suddenly crashing down on her. "I don't know if I can do this," she breathed, the fear returning. "I don't even know where to start." Julian walked over to the desk and picked up the top binder. He didn't open it. He just looked at her. "Don't read it like they do," he said. "Don't look for what's there. Look for what's missing. Don't listen to the words. Listen to the music. Just like you did last night." His confidence in her was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was a weight of expectation she had never known. For the next 3 days, Elara lived in that room. The city glittered outside her window, a constant reminder of the world she was temporarily a part of. She dove into the documents, and the world of Thorn and Ethelred consumed her. At first, it was a dizzying cacophony of legalese and financial jargon. But slowly, as she forced herself to relax and let her instincts take over, the music began to emerge. She ignored the executive summaries and expert opinions. She went straight to the raw data, the appendices, the footnotes, the places where people hid things. She spread pages across the floor, drawing lines between them with a red pen, creating a vast, complex web of connections. She didn't sleep. She barely ate. She was fueled by coffee and a burning, obsessive need to find the truth. She found the first cracked keystone on the second day. A series of small, seemingly insignificant land sales in a foreign country, all processed through the same obscure law firm. The profits were used to offset a minor operational loss. It was a tiny lie, a single dissonant note, but it was a start. She called Julian. "PDX Holdings," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "It's not just one valuation. It's a dozen shell companies. They're selling assets to each other, inflating the price with each transaction, and booking the difference as profit." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Keep going," was all he said, but his voice was tight with intensity. Meanwhile, downstairs in the Shark Tank, the waters were stirring. Marcus Vance felt the shift in the current. The Ethelred deal, which should have been sailing toward a swift conclusion, had stalled. Julian was being evasive, canceling meetings, asking for obscure data points without explanation. Marcus's instincts, honed by years of corporate predation, told him something was wrong. He heard whispers of Julian using a secret consultant, and a cold fury began to build in him. He had orchestrated the Ethelred deal. It was his masterpiece, his stepping stone to the CEO's chair. He would not let some ghost analyst, or Julian's sudden cold feet, derail his ambition. He began to dig, using his own network of spies and informants within the company to find out who Julian was talking to. David Chun, Julian's lawyer, was a constant presence, a wary sentinel. He had been profoundly skeptical of Julian's plan. "You're betting the company on the gut feeling of a janitor, Julian," he had argued. "This is insane. If this gets out, you'll be a laughingstock." But as Elara's findings started to come in, detailed and concise, clear emails, David's skepticism turned to awe and then to alarm. She wasn't just finding errors. She was uncovering a deliberate, systemic fraud. "She's a prodigy," David admitted to Julian, shaking his head in disbelief as they reviewed her latest discovery. She sees things in a way I've never encountered. Where did you find her? Julian just looked out the window, a faint smile on his lips. I looked in a place no one else was bothering to see, in her secluded office. Alara felt the change in him, too. His calls became more frequent. He would ask about her progress, but then the conversation would drift. He asked about her father. He asked about her life before this. He spoke of his own father, of the suffocating weight of his legacy. The Ice King was melting, and in his place was a man who seemed as isolated as she was. A strange, fragile connection was being forged between them, a bond built in the secret language of truth and numbers, a silent acknowledgement of two lonely souls who had unexpectedly found each other in the heart of the storm. The pressure was immense, but for the first time in her life, Alara didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, and it was giving her the strength to uncover the final, devastating truth. The smoking gun appeared on the 5th day, not in a complex spreadsheet, but in a simple expense report buried in the digital archives of Ethelred's marketing department. It was a receipt for a dinner, a very expensive dinner at a private club, dated 6 months ago. There were 2 attendees, the CEO of Ethelred and Thorn Industries' own COO, Marcus Vance. The date was 2 full months before Marcus had ever discovered the merger opportunity and presented it to Julian. The lie wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the very foundation of the deal. Marcus hadn't discovered an opportunity. He had co-created a conspiracy. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. This was no longer about saving the company from a bad investment. This was about exposing a traitor in their midst. She worked feverishly, cross-referencing the date of that dinner with other documents. A flurry of encrypted emails between Marcus and Ethelred's CFO. Small, untraceable wire transfers from an Ethelred subsidiary to an offshore account. An account she traced back to a holding company owned by Marcus Vance's brother-in-law. The web was complete. The picture was horrifyingly clear. Marcus was set to receive a massive kickback upon the deal's completion, a reward for knowingly leading his own company into a fraudulent merger that would have eventually collapsed, but not before he and his conspirators had cashed out, leaving Julian and the shareholders to hold the bag. She laid it all out, the false valuations, the shell companies, the secret dinner, the wire transfers, in a final damning report. She didn't use corporate jargon. She wrote it simply, chronologically, telling the story of the betrayal. It was the story of a beautiful house built over a sinkhole. She pressed send and leaned back in her chair, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. She had done it. She had found the truth. Now it was up to Julian. She called him on the burner phone. "It's done," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's worse than we thought." An hour later, Julian and David Chun stood in her small office. The floor was still a mosaic of papers connected by red string. David was pale, his face grim as he read the final page of her report on the laptop. "My God," he whispered, looking up at Julian. He was going to burn the whole company down for a payday. Vance was selling us out from the inside. Julian's face was like stone, but his eyes were blazing with a cold, controlled fury. The betrayal was personal. Marcus was more than a COO. He was someone Julian had, on some level, trusted. He had been groomed by Julian's own father. This was a betrayal of legacy, of loyalty, of everything the company was supposed to stand for. He looked at Alara, who was watching him, her expression a mixture of fatigue and apprehension. She had handed him a bomb. Now he had to decide whether to detonate it. "Exposing this will be ugly," David warned, his lawyerly caution kicking in. "The board will panic. The stock will take a hit. Ethelred will sue. Marcus will fight back, drag your name through the mud. The easy path is to find a quiet reason to kill the deal. Blame market volatility. Let Marcus save face and push him out later." Julian looked from David's pragmatic face to Alara's clear, unwavering gaze. He saw the integrity that had been missing from his life, from his company. His father would have taken the easy path. He would have buried the problem, handled it behind closed doors, preserved the illusion of strength at all costs. But Julian was not his father. Alara hadn't just shown him the truth about the deal. She had shown him the truth about himself, about the kind of leader he wanted to be. "No," Julian said, his voice ringing with finality. "We're not burying it. We're going to drag it into the light." All of it. He turned to Alara. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. And you're coming with me." Alara's eyes widened in alarm. "Me? In the boardroom? I can't. They won't listen to me." "They will," Julian said, his voice softening as he looked at her. "You're going to do exactly what you did for me. You're going to make them listen to the music." The atmosphere in the 48th floor boardroom was electric with tension. The board members, a collection of stern, silver-haired men and women who represented old money and established power, sat around the polished mahogany table, their displeasure palpable. They had been summoned on short notice, their schedules disrupted for a meeting Julian had refused to explain. Marcus Vance sat to Julian's right, looking smooth and confident, though a flicker of annoyance crossed his features. He leaned toward Julian. "A bit of drama, Julian?" he murmured with a condescending smile. "You could have just told me you were getting cold feet. I could have managed the board for you." Julian ignored him, his gaze fixed on the door. David Chun stood by his side, his face a mask of nervous resolve. The door opened, and a junior executive escorted Alara into the room. She was wearing a simple black dress David's assistant had procured for her, a stark contrast to her usual gray smock, but she still felt like an imposter. Every eye in the room turned to her, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright disdain. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. "Who is this?" one board member asked aloud. Marcus Vance stared at Alara, a slow, dawning realization on his face, followed by a look of pure contempt. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You can't be serious, Julian," he sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is your secret consultant? The cleaning lady? Have you lost your mind?" The room erupted in shocked whispers. Alara felt her face burn with humiliation. She wanted to run, to disappear back into the invisible world where she belonged. But then she felt Julian's hand on her arm, a steady, grounding pressure. "Alara Vance is here at my request," Julian announced, his voice cutting through the noise like steel. "She has been conducting a final review of the Ethelred merger, and she has found something you all need to see." He gestured to the large screen at the end of the room. "Alara, if you would, all her fear, all her self-doubt, coalesced into a single point of cold, clear anger. She would not let them dismiss her. She would not let Marcus's lie win." She took a deep breath, walked to the head of the table, and picked up the remote. The first slide appeared on the screen, a simple photo of the Ethelred headquarters. "This is the story of a house," she began, her voice quiet but carrying in the suddenly silent room. "A beautiful house. From the outside, it looks strong, valuable, a perfect investment." She clicked to the next slide, a complex chart of asset valuations. "These are the pillars holding the house up. They look solid, but they're not. They're hollow." For the next 20 minutes, Alara spoke. She didn't use the language of finance. She used the language of truth. She spoke of cracked keystones and phantom supports. She walked them through the web of shell companies, the inflated numbers, the cyclical transactions. She made the complex simple, the opaque transparent. The board was rapt, their initial scorn replaced by dawning horror. She didn't present herself as an expert, but as a storyteller, revealing the narrative hidden within the data. Marcus began to squirm in his seat, his face losing its color. "This is absurd," he finally burst out, standing up. "This is a fantasy spun by a disgruntled employee. The numbers have been vetted by the best firms in the world." Alara didn't look at him. She looked at the board. "The best firms in the world were looking at a painting," she said calmly. "I was listening to the music, and the music was wrong." Then, she clicked to the final slide. It was a copy of the dinner receipt. Marcus Vance and the Ethelred CEO. Dated 6 months ago. A collective gasp went through the room. "This house wasn't just poorly built," Alara said, her eyes finally locking with Marcus's. "It was a trap, designed by the seller and the broker." She laid out the final pieces of evidence. The emails, the wire transfers, the offshore account. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Marcus's ragged breathing. He looked at the faces around the table, seeing not allies, but judges. He looked at Julian, whose expression was pure ice. He had been exposed, utterly and completely, by a woman he never would have noticed in 1,000 years. The trap had been sprung, but he was the one caught in it. The fallout was swift and brutal. Marcus Vance was fired before he even left the boardroom, escorted from the building by security. A team of forensic accountants, guided by Alara's report, descended upon his office, and by the end of the day, the matter was in the hands of federal prosecutors. The Ethelred merger was officially dead, the announcement sending a temporary shockwave through the market, but Julian's decisive action and transparency with his shareholders quickly stabilized the company's stock. He had weathered the storm, emerging not weakened, but stronger, with a newfound respect from the very board that had doubted him. He had proven he was a leader of integrity, not just inheritance. That evening, Julian found Alara not in her small, temporary office, but back in the 48th floor boardroom. She was standing by the panoramic window, looking out at the city lights, no longer a ghost in the halls, but a quiet conqueror. The whiteboard behind her had been wiped clean. "It's over," he said, coming to stand beside her. "You did it." She didn't turn to look at him. "I just showed you what was already there," she said softly. "You were the one who had the courage to look." "I almost didn't," he confessed, the admission costing him something. "My father would have buried it, made a deal." He believed exposing a weakness, even to fix it, was a sign of failure. "And what do you believe?" she asked. He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her profile, the intelligence in her eyes. "I believe the most valuable asset a company has is the truth," he said. "And I want you to help me protect it." He held out an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $250,000. Alara looked at it, her eyes wide. "This is more than we agreed," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's not even a fraction of what you're worth," Julian replied. "This is for the week you gave me. But I hope it's not the last." He slid a second document across the table. It was a formal employment offer. The position title was one that had never existed before at Thorn Industries. Head of Strategic Integrity. The salary was astronomical, beyond anything she could have ever imagined. It came with a corner office, a staff, and a direct line to the CEO. It was a new life, a new identity, handed to her in a single folder. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at it. It wasn't just the money or the title. It was the word, integrity, the quality her father had cherished, the very thing that had led to his ruin in a world that didn't value it, was now the foundation of her future. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Julian said, a genuine, unguarded smile finally reaching his eyes. "I need you, Alara. My company needs you." She looked from the offer, to his earnest face, to the glittering city outside. The city no longer looked like an unconquerable fortress. It looked like a promise. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. She had not just found her voice. She had discovered that her voice was the most powerful instrument in the entire orchestra. She had earned her place, not by changing who she was, but by being exactly who she had always been. The invisible woman was finally, truly seen. A week later, Alara stood in her new office. It was spacious and bright, with the same stunning view as the boardroom. Her father was being moved to the best private care facility in the state, his future secure. The mountain of debt that had shadowed her entire adult life had vanished. She was free, but as she looked out the window, she knew her transformation was more than just financial. She had found her purpose. A knock on her door made her turn. It was Julian holding 2 cups of coffee. He wasn't wearing his usual power suit, but a simple sweater, his armor fully discarded. He handed her a cup, his fingers brushing against hers, sending a jolt of warmth through her. "First day on the job," he said, his smile gentle. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying," she admitted with a small laugh. "And wonderful." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city below. The professional barrier between them had dissolved, replaced by a deep, unspoken understanding. He had seen her when she was invisible, and she had seen him when he was isolated. They had saved each other. You know, Julian said, his voice low and serious, you didn't just find the fraud in the Ethelred deal. Oh, you found the fraud in me? He continued, turning to face her. I was playing a part. The Ice King. The ruthless successor. I was trying so hard to be my father's son that I was forgetting how to be my own man. I was so focused on the legacy I was supposed to build that I was creating something hollow. He looked into her eyes, and she saw the raw sincerity there. You reminded me of what real value looks like. It's not in the stock price. It's in the integrity of the foundation. You didn't just save my company, Elara. You saved me from my own gilded cage. The air grew thick with a meaning that went far beyond business. This was no longer CEO and employee. This was a man and a woman who had seen the truth in each other. He had offered her a job, a future, security. But what he was offering now was something more, something priceless. I spent my whole life being told I was nothing, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Just a cleaner, the daughter of a failed man. Your father wasn't a failure, Julian said fiercely, his hand covering hers on the coffee cup. He was a man of integrity in a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word. He gave you your gift, Elara, and it's the most valuable thing I've ever seen. He stepped closer, his gaze searching her face. I don't want to be your boss, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. I want to be your partner, in building a company with integrity, and maybe, in building a life with it, too. Elara's heart swelled. The discordant music of her past, the screaming numbers and the crushing debt, finally faded away, replaced by a new melody, a harmony she had never expected to find. It was a song of hope, of recognition, of a love built not on illusion, but on the bedrock of truth. She smiled, a real, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. I think, she said, her voice clear and strong, that sounds like a perfect investment. So I ask you again, what is the true value of a person? Is it found on a resume, or in a quiet, unseen act of integrity? Perhaps the greatest treasures are not locked away in vaults, but are hidden in plain sight, in the people we overlook every single day. Look closer. Listen harder. You might just find the truth you've been searching for. What do you think? Who are the invisible heroes in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below.